So we're going to look a little bit at like documenting student learning, curation, reflection using digital portfolios. And so this is kind of like how everything comes together. So like, all right, I have all this content. I have, I have my students creating all this stuff. Like, what am I doing with it? Like, for sure we have Canvas, of course, and students can turn things in, and that's fine. But like Canvas is like a LMS. It's meant to help you with your digital workflow so that you can like post assignments, create courses, create blended learning experiences, be able to have experiences for kids online. But what about the side from the student perspective? Like, how are they creating things and where are they putting work that matters? And how are they demonstrating growth? Because it's not about you, it's about them. Like, how are they able to articulate their growth as learners? That's the ultimate goal, I think, as a teacher, to get your kids to be able to say, this is where I was and here's where I am now. So we're going to look at the difference between process and showcase portfolios. And I'm going to talk a little bit about assessment and where the digital tools fit in. Let's go in. So really, like, we want to think about, how we're using the information or the demonstrations of learning that kids are creating to get to know them better, and understanding where our learners are through the rich information that we gather when kids are creating. I want to talk a little bit about portfolios. We're going to look at curation and reflection, and then I'm going to talk about digital workflow. And this is not just for the teachers, but from the students' perspective as well. And I remember how I mentioned, like, there was the student lessons. So I actually have a teacher workshop here if you ever wanted to approach this with your own faculty. If you were like thinking of doing a workshop at your school, there's a teacher workshop on digital portfolios. And then here's the student lessons that I was telling you about, and they're right linked here. And like, it's a 3-part lesson, and it has like video tutorials that are closed caption for every single one. So it's like, explore what makes a good logo, who am I video, and Adobe page portfolio. So like, if you were thinking of doing any of this stuff, it's all in here for you, ready to go. So wait, let's go back. Okay. Okay. Okay, so I mentioned this before, but I think it's really important to just always come back to, like, when we're using technology effectively, we see these 3 things happen, right? We're having students make their thinking visible, we're providing every student with a voice, and we're allowing students to share their work. And so again, like, I always come back, because I always want you thinking about this when you're using tech with your students. Like, is it really helping kids make their thinking visible? Are you really hearing from every learner in your classroom? And ultimately, like, are we providing them with those opportunities to share their work, and hopefully with a real audience? Like, it really makes a difference when kids publish. Like, it transforms the way that they approach what they're doing in their class. So I won't get into this, but ultimately it always comes back to me to designing backwards with the end in mind. And like, I know that like Monique will totally agree with this. Like, she's creating these online courses, and ultimately, like, she's thinking, like, in the end, ultimately, what is it that, you guys who are taking this course, like, what are you going to get from this course? Who are you as learners? What are your needs? And ultimately, what are you going to get out of this class and this course? And how am I designing backwards to make sure that I'm meeting your needs, and I'm hearing from all of you, and I'm making sure that you as the learner are getting what you need? And I think that, like, that's all UBD essentially is. It's just a framework for how we think about designing instruction in our class. Feel free to click on these templates, because I've given you templates and examples, and like an example of a back end lesson and a student hyperdoc. So you can get a sense of like what that actually looks like with an example of a UBD background lesson, and what the front face for a student would look like. So, I want you to think about that, because it all comes back to, how we're designing and what we're trying to get from each kid. We want to be thinking like, okay, so this is my plan. This is what I want my students to get from my lesson, but how do I know if they understand it or not? And how do I know if they're getting it? And so that's where assessment is really sexy and important. And I love assessment, and people think I'm crazy because like usually people hate assessment because it's not necessarily always being done in the best way. And so I want us to think about assessment from this lens. And I don't know if you use this language, but I'm going to teach you the language that I've been taught around assessment. And that's assessment for learning, assessment of learning, and assessment as learning. And so assessment for learning is when we look at it from the process form, like it's process, like we're taking assessment and we're gaining an understanding of where students are in their process of their learning. And we're using that information to inform us so that we can make necessary changes either in our instruction, or we can make necessary changes for our learner by differentiating what they're doing based on the information that we've gathered. So usually I'll do a check for understanding when students come in the door, because I want to get a sense of my learners of where they are in process as we start as a baseline. And that's a really great formative assessment that I'll do like an entry ticket. I'll get them to create a Spark video right away of a concept that I might be teaching that's really new, just for them to, or maybe I'll use Flipgrid. I mean, like I might just do something really like, maybe I'll use a Padlet at the beginning of the class, and I'll ask a question and get them to quickly respond. You know, whatever the case is, I give them an opportunity to just sort of share, and I get information about where they are. And then from that, I'll make necessary changes in my lesson. So that's an example of how I might use formative assessment. Then there's assessment of learning, and this is the summative piece. This is like, you know, this is when we're evaluating their work based on the standards that we're trying to teach. This is seeing like, ultimately, like, at the end, usually it's an assessment of learning happens more like towards when we're kind of like working on something and it's a project, and we want to know like, did they understand it and how did they do against the standards that we were working through? And so that's usually a summative assessment. And now assessment as learning is my favorite assessment because it's reflective. It's getting kids as they're learning to be able to articulate their growth and be able to explain their own thinking and learning. And that is so powerful, and very often it's overlooked and not done enough in our classes. And believe me, I am guilty of it as well. It takes time and practice to get to a place where we're encouraging students to be reflective practitioners. But it is so powerful when they do it, right? When you're able to articulate your learning and be able to say, this is where I am, this is where I was, and this is where I want to go, that's when you're able to really build the metacognitive skills, and also like an understanding of how, the metacognitive skills is understanding of how you learn and of your own learning. And that's incredibly powerful. And that's a lifelong skill that they can develop. So when we think about that role, when you are doing formative assessment, the role for you is you're a facilitator. You're kind of the guide on the side, right? And you're facilitating that learning, right? The role of a teacher, when we look at it in terms of assessment of learning, the summative piece is you're using the information you're gathering to measure achievement against the curriculum. And then the role of a teacher when you're doing any kind of reflective practice is just to ask guiding questions. You're not giving them the responses. You're asking guiding questions and letting them kind of grow as they need to grow. And that's hard to do, by the way, okay? That's not easy. Like, you want to give kids all the answers all the time, but it's really important for them to have time to kind of grow on their own and figure things out sometimes. You know, and obviously you have to scaffold that depending on who your learners are and where they are in their journey. So when we look at assessment for learning, we determine where students' needs are, we assist and encourage, and sometimes there's a bit more direct instruction. When we're looking at assessment of learning, we're looking at how students have now incorporated the feedback into their learning, and they have created a more, and I put that in quotation marks because that's really important, because I don't want to say anything is ever final, but how they have taken the information that they've gathered from all the formative assessment, and now they've applied that and to demonstrate their learning, right? And then assessment as learning, again, is like just asking students those guiding questions. And it's a continuous process. So I think it's really important to understand this language and understand the difference, because ultimately, like, we want our kids to be, independent learners, and like the assessment is everything. So like when we think of some reflective questions that we might ask, like, what did I learn from the feedback I received? Like, how did I reflect upon, revise, etc., like from the feedback that I received and from the assessment by my teacher? What new skills and knowledge have I gained? What will I do differently? So if they can answer like just these 3 questions, that's really powerful, because you're really gaining an understanding of like how they're growing, and they're able to articulate how they're growing. This often gets overlooked. It's one of those things that like we kind of just pass on, and it is so, so important. Well, I'm going to just show it for a second.
Hi, my name is Rachel Ashurzda, and today I'm going to be showing you my art portfolio for 2013 through 2014. First, I made a photo mosaic. I love this art project. I took many types of magazines that had different textures or different shades of color red. I glued them together and then made this love sign. I love this love sign. I always see it when I go to...
Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. This is so fantastic. This is 4th graders art portfolio reflection. And but this could be a writing assignment. This could be, this doesn't just have to be art. It lends itself so nicely because it's so visual. And when you're talking about something visual, it does lend itself. But like this could apply itself in any subject area. And so I show this because like you could do this in a Spark video, have a student put a piece of work, analog work, and talk over their work and explain their process. And my question, like, to you, and you don't have to respond, but is like, do you think that this would be assessment for learning, assessment of learning, or assessment as learning? So, could I use this as assessment for, of, or as? Like, what do you think?
Fred says of and as.
Awesome. Yes. And that's the thing. You're not wrong. Like, you could use this to see as an assessment of their learning. Like, she's going through her portfolio, as she's talking about her, the expression and how and the tools, she's like, do I need to give her a paper pencil test afterwards to like make sure that she understood the concept she was taught? No, she's explained it, she's described it, she's shared it, she's reflecting on it, why she liked it. But I could also use this as an assessment for learning if I wanted to, because I might have her just do quick reflections and check to see did she understand it, and give her an opportunity to speak. I think very often we overlook the importance of getting kids to talk about their learning. We are very drawn to getting kids to write, but when they're able to articulate their learning, it's so important. They need to be able to express themselves, and that's a skill they need to be able to learn. So having them create a Spark video and get them to just kind of use that to process and kind of give some context and categorize pieces of their work is a really, really great way to approach this. Just getting them to kind of document their learning, reflect on their learning, have time to do that. That's really powerful.